Abai arrived in Mathura by train from Allahabad and approached Kosi by rickshaw. The countryside was full of charm for Abai. Instead of factories and large buildings, there were mostly forests. And aside from the main paved roads on which he traveled, there were only dirt roads and soft sandy lanes. As a Vaishnava, Abai felt sensations an ordinary man wouldn't. Now and then he sighted a peacock in the field, its exotic plumage proclaiming the glories of Vrindavan and Krishna. Even a non-devotee, however, could appreciate the many varieties of birds, their interesting cries and songs filling the air. Occasionally, a tree would be filled with madly chirping sparrows, making their urgent twilight clamor before resting for the night. Even one unaware of the special significance of Vrindavan could feel a relief of mind in the simple countryside, where people built fires from cow manure fuel and cooked their evening meals in the open, their fires adding rich natural smells to their indefinable mixture, which was the odor of the earth. There were many gnarled old trees and colorful stretches of flowers, bushes of bright violet, camellia, trees abloom with delicate white parijat blossoms, and big yellow kadamba flowers, rarely seen outside Vrindavan. On the road, there were lively horse-drawn tanga traffic. The month of Kartik, October to November, was one of the several times of the year that drew pilgrims to Vrindavan. The one-horse tangas carried large families, some coming from hundreds of miles away. Larger bands of pilgrims grouped by village, walked together, and women dressed in bright-colored saris, brown-skinned men and women sometimes singing bhajans, carrying but a few simple possessions as they headed for the town of thousands of temples, Vrindavan. And there were businessmen like Abhay dressed more formally coming from a city, maybe to spend the weekend. Most of them had at least some semblance of a religious motive: to see Krishna in the temple, to bathe in the holy Jamuna river, to visit the sites where Lord Krishna had performed his pastimes, such as the lifting of Govardhan Hill, the killing of the Keshi demon, or the dancing in the evening with the gopis. Abhay was sensitive to the atmosphere of Vrindavan, and he noted the activity along the road. But more than that, he cherished with anticipation the fulfillment of his journey. His meeting again after a long separation, the saintly person he had always thought of within himself, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, who had spoken to him in Kolkata and convinced him of Lord Chaitanya's mission to preach Krishna consciousness. Abhay would soon see him again, and this purpose filled his mind. Upon reaching the lantern-illuminated camp of the Gaudiya Math and inquiring at the registration post, he was allowed to join the Parikrama village. He was assigned to a tent of Grahastha men and was offered prasadam. The people were friendly and in good spirits, and Abhay talked of his activities with the Math members in Kolkata and Allahabad. Then there was a gathering. A sannyasi was making an announcement. This evening, he said, there would be a scheduled visit to a nearby temple to see the deity of Sheshashayi Vishnu. Some of the pilgrims cheered, Hari Bol, Hare Krishna. The sannyasi also announced that His Divine Grace, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, would speak that evening for the last time and would be leaving the parikrama party for the next day. So there was a choice of going on the parikrama or staying for the lecture. Srila Prabhupada. So I met them in Kochi, and Keshav Maharaj was informing that Srila Bhakti Siddhanta is going to Mathura tomorrow morning, and he will speak Harikatha this evening. Anyone who wants to remain, or anyone who wants to, may remain. Otherwise, they may go to see Sheshashayi Vishnu. So at that time, I think only 10 or 12 men remained. Sridhar Maharaj was one of them. And I thought it wise. What can I see at the Sheshashayi? Let me hear what Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur will speak. Let me hear. When Abhay arrived, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta was already speaking. He sat with his back erect, a shawl around his shoulders, not speaking like a professional lecturer giving a scheduled performance, but addressing a small gathering in his room. At last, Abhay was in his presence again. Abhay marveled to see and hear him, this unique soul possessed of Krishna Katha, speaking uninterruptedly about Krishna in his deep, low voice, in ecstasy and deep knowledge. Abhay sat and heard with rapt attention. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati had been speaking regularly about Sambandha, Abhidhaya, and Prayojana. Sambandha is the stage of devotional service in which awareness of God is awakened. Abhidhaya is rendering loving service to the Lord, and Prayojana is the ultimate goal, pure love of God. He stressed that his explanations were in exact recapitulation of what had originally been spoken by Krishna and passed down through disciplic succession. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur's particular utterance, mostly Bengali, sometimes English, with frequent quoting of Sanskrit from the Shastras, with deep erudition. It is Krishna, said Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, who is the only super lord over the entire universe and beyond it, of Vaikuntha, the transcendental region. As such, no one can raise any obstacle against his enjoyment. An hour went by, 2 hours. The already small gathering in Bhakti Siddhanta's room gradually thinned. A few sannyasis left, excusing themselves to tend to duties connected with the parikrama camp. Only a few intimate leaders remained. Abhay was the only outsider. Of course, he was a devotee, not an outsider, but in the sense that he was not a sannyasi, was not handling any duties, was not even initiated, and was not traveling with the parikrama, but had joined only for a day. In that sense, he was an outsider. The philosophy of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati was speaking, however, was democratically open to whoever would give an ardent hearing. And that Abhay was doing. He was listening with wonder. Sometimes he would not even understand something, but he would go on listening intently, submissively, his intelligence drinking in the words. He felt Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati revealing to him the direct vision of the spiritual world. Just as a person reveals something by opening a door or pushing aside a curtain. He was revealing the reality, and this reality was loving service to the lotus feet of Radha Krishna, the supremely worshipable personality of Godhead. How masterfully he spoke, and with utter conviction and boldness. It was with such awe that Abhay listened with fastened attention. Of course, all Vaishnavas accepted Krishna as their worshipable Lord. But how conclusively and with what sound logic was the faith of the Vaishnavas established by this great teacher? After several hours, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati stopped speaking. Abhay felt prepared to go on listening without cessation. And yet he had no puzzling doubts or queries to place forward. He only wanted to hear more. And Srila Bhakti Siddhanta made his exit. Abhay bowed, offering his obeisances, and then left the intimate circle of sannyasis in their row of tents and went to the outer circle of tents, his mind surcharged with the words of his spiritual master. Now their relationship seemed more tangible. Hare Krishna, is Maharaj here yet?
Maharaj doesn't seem to be there. You may keep reading for a while.
Now the relationship seemed more tangible. He still treasured his original impression of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, the saintly person who had spoken to him on the rooftop in Calcutta. But tonight, that single impression that had sustained him for years in Allahabad had been enriched and filled with new life. His spiritual master and the impression of his words were as much a reality as the stars in the sky and the moon over Vrindavan. That impression of hearing from Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati was filling him with its reality, and all other reality was forming itself around the absolute reality of Srila Gurudev, just as all the planets circle around the sun. The next morning, Abhay was up with the others more than an hour before dawn, bathed and chanting mantras in congregation. Later in the morning, the tall, stately figure of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, dressed in plain saffron, got into the back seat of a car and rode away from the camp. Thoughtful and grave, he looked back and waved, accepting the loving farewell gestures of his followers. Abhay stood amongst them.
I think Maharaj is still not here, Prabhuji.
Just read a little bit more.
Yes, Prabhuji, you can go.
A little more than a month later, Abhay was again anticipating an imminent meeting with Srila Bhakti Siddhanta, this time at Allahabad. Abhay had only recently returned from Vrindavan to his work at Prayag Pharmacy, when the devotees at the Allahabad Gaudiya Math informed him of the good news. They had secured land and funds for constructing a temple. The Sri Rup Gaudiya Math and Srila Bhakti Siddhanta would be coming on November 21st to preside over the ceremony for the laying of the cornerstone. Sir William Malcolm Haley, Governor of the United Provinces, would be the respected guest, and in a grand ceremony, they would lay the foundation stone in the presence of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta. When Abhay learned that there would be also an initiation ceremony, he asked if he could be initiated. Atul Ananda, the Math's president, assured Abhay that he would introduce him to Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati.
Krishna Prabhu, Maharaj just joined.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisance. Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you once again for giving us your association, accepting our invitation. So we'll maybe just a short introduction of Maharaj in case there are new persons who weren't here the last time that Maharaj was here. His Holiness Bhakti Chaitanya Maharaj is actually from New Zealand. He's from Auckland. And he met His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada for the first time in New Zealand, as he explained last time when he spoke to us. And then later in 1973, Maharaj took initiation from His Divine Grace in London. And for the last almost about 50 years, he's been serving Srila Prabhupada's mission in many different ways. He's initiating a spiritual master. He was serving in the BBT. He was serving in many administrative roles in the GBC. And he's overseeing preaching in Africa, which is a very challenging field to preach, as well as parts of Europe and in India. And Maharaj has also written a number of books. One of them is called Vrindavan, the Playground of God. I don't have that book, but he's got another book. This book is amazing. It's Govardhan, the hill that fulfills all desires. And I was told that there are many pictures here of deities that we might not be able to be able to take darshan of them. We might not be fortunate to go. But Maharaj has kindly taken lots of pictures of different deities. It's just amazing, the pictures in this book, and very good quality. So maybe Maharaj can share with us how devotees that are interested, they can also have a copy of this book.
Let us not forget that His Holiness Bhakti Chaitanya Maharaj is the chairman of the GBC. And we offer our obeisances at his feet for skillfully executing such devotional austerity and bliss.
Thank you, Maharaj. Jai, His Holiness.
Payavrata Maharaj.
Maharaj ki jai.
I was not expecting to meet you here, but it's just my good fortune. What a pleasant surprise. Yes, well, You want me to say something about that Govardhan book, is it? Or just, I understood I had to talk about Lord Vamana Dev.
Yes, Maharaj, but today's Vamana Dvadasi, so maybe about Vamana Day. Yes.
So today in New Zealand is Vamana Dvadasi, is it?
Yes, Maharaj.
It was here in South Africa, it was yesterday. But that's fine, no problem. So Hare Krishna, everyone, particularly Devamrita Maharaj, Hari Bol. Wow. And Yamaraj Prabhu from Singapore, Hari Bol. And all devotees from New Zealand. And last time, whenever it was, not long ago, I talked about a little bit about my history there in New Zealand. I'm from St. Heliers, if you know where that is, eastern suburbs. Anyway, right. So today here in NZ, it's Vamana Dvadasi, Lord Vamana's appearance day. How auspicious and wonderful. And let us go through the pastime. It's a famous pastime. I think, so many, or practically all devotees are basically familiar with it. But let's go through their different, there's a number of subtleties and, things like that, that perhaps some of the devotees might not be so familiar with. All right, so let us go. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastya Chadishtarne Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakapacharubhyascha kripa sindhubhyevacha. Patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. All glories to all the Vaishnavas. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. All glories to Lord Vamana, and all glories to His Holiness Devamrita Maharaj too. Gosh, you're so fortunate to have his association. So anyway, devotees, the appearance day of Lord Vamana. Well, this is the descriptions found in the 8th canto, Srimad Bhagavatam, and it's actually quite a long story, the whole story. From the 8th canto, there's all sorts of back and forward between the demigods and the demons. The demigods headed by Lord Indra, the demons headed by Bali Maharaj. Yeah, Bali Maharaj, he's king of the demons, but he's not your sort of typical, very heavy duty, atheistic, super materialistic demon. He's the grandson of Prahlad. That's an interesting twist in the whole situation, that Prahlad, of course, was the son of, an official demon, the real thing, Hiranyakashipu, the demon's demon, you could say, something like that. Just sort of like the founder Acharya of the demon line. But It's another long story, which we won't go into, but somehow by some amazing arrangement, Hiranyakashipu, even though being such an extreme demon, to put it mildly, he had a son like Prahlad, who's just, an incredible devotee, absolutely. But it's interesting that Prahlad, even though he is obviously, he's one of the Mahajans, he's just one of the greatest devotees, but he did not break away from the community of the demons. Yeah, in fact, he was basically instructed by Lord Nrsingadev to just take over from Hiranyakashipu, sit on this, and take over from Hiranyakashipu and become king of the demons. I mean, that's kind of quite an extraordinary thing, but that's what happened. That's what he did. And so he ruled over the demons, but he was still a devotee, a great devotee. And Bali Maharaj is his grandson. The son of Prahlad was Virochana, and then Bali. Anyway, he's the grandson. He's the grandson of Prahlad. He's the grandson of Prahlad, let's just say that. So, right, he's the grandson of Prahlad, and as such, he had, he picked up from Prahlad a, certain nature, very, very pious and noble, honorable, that sort of nature. So anyway, the thing is, what I'm talking about, it's the lead up, how it all comes to be that Lord Vamana appears. Not just that, there's Lord Vamana, but there's a history behind it. So this is the history, and as happens, the celestial demons, and Bali is the king of them, and the demigods, there's this constant rivalry, ongoing rivalry, and a lot of fighting. And I won't go through the details, but goes back and forth in the beginning, in the earlier chapters of the 8th canto. There's the churning of the milk ocean with the appearance of Kurma, with the appearance of Mohini, and fighting before and fighting after between the demigods and the demons. But very important point philosophically, very, very important point, is that Bali Maharaj and his main associates, the other leaders of the demons, who were basically demons, as opposed to Bali, who's a devotee. So what happened was, which really sort of turned the tide in the whole situation of this back and forth between the demigods and the demons, is that when after the immediate previous battle in which all the demons were killed. Shukracharya brought them all back to life. Yeah. And that was after Mohini. Shukracharya, who's like the guru or the priest, really, the priest, or you could say guru come priest sort of situation. He brought them all back to life, and then Bali Maharaj and the other leaders of the demons, they became extremely dedicated to Shukracharya. And yeah, just worshipped him and just took shelter of him and glorified him and got his mercy in certain respects. And as a result of all that, Bali Maharaj and those demon leaders and just the demon army in general, they became extremely powerful. They became extremely powerful and were able to defeat Indra and the demigods. You know, there was an incident sometime before in which Indra offended Dvadasi Muni. And of course, we don't want to offend anyone. We really don't want to offend anyone at all. But you definitely, absolutely don't want to offend Dvadasi Muni. If you're going to offend someone, let it not be Dvadasi Muni, because he is super heavy, super duper heavy. Gosh. So there was an incident in which Dvadasi Muni offered Indra a garland, which he had worn, which Dvadasi had worn. And Indra was riding on his elephant, Airavata, and in a casual way, he just took that garland and he didn't put it on himself, which obviously was the idea of Dvadasi. But he just stuck it on the elephant, on Airavata. And, you know, Airavata is an animal, and, you know, you see if sometimes you put garlands on cows and they resist and they want to get it off because they're animals. They don't appreciate or understand. So the elephant just was annoyed by this garland and just threw it down, and Dvadasi got upset. And Dvadasi, I mean, you know, you can imagine anyone practically would get a bit upset about that, but particularly Dvadasi. So like this, I mean, there were some other things too, but the demigods became somewhat weakened. This is going back a bit. But now, just after this, the churning of the ocean of milk, just shortly after, when Shukracharya brought all the demons back to life, they became dedicated to Shukracharya. And the demigods had become somewhat weakened due to their offenses, going back a little bit. And there, you know, an interesting point and a very important point is made. And it's really something we should bear in mind very carefully, that, and Srila Prabhupada explains that when you become dedicated to a senior, you know, obviously, particularly if it's like a real spiritual master like Prabhupada, then, you know, if you become really dedicated to someone like Prabhupada, oh, you get mercy in all sorts of ways. it's just, it's revolutionary actually. But Prabhupada makes the point that even though Shukracharya was not, what to speak of being a pure devotee like Prabhupada, he wasn't even a devotee. He was just like a sage, really, a Vedic sage. He knew about Lord Vishnu. He knew so many of these things, like Dvadasi, who's also not a devotee and definitely not a pure devotee. And, he's definitely much more on the sort of Vedic sage type of side of things. But still, if someone takes shelter of like a teacher or like a priest, some person like that who's on a higher level, Prabhupada makes the point, you get some potency from that. A teacher, a priest, if you really take shelter, you get some potency. So even though Shukracharya, he was no pure devotee. And as we go through the pastime, that'll become abundantly clear, particularly just before Lord Vamana takes his 3 steps. But still, despite that, by the mercy of Shukracharya, Bali and his other leader associates of the demons, they became very powerful. More like obviously materially powerful, but nonetheless powerful. And therefore they were able to defeat Indra, who had, become somewhat weakened due to offense. So anyway, bear that in mind. It's an interesting point. It's a little bit of a subtlety. So Bali Maharaj and the demons, they defeated Indra and the demigods and booted them out, kicked them out of the heavenly planets. And the demigods, they became literally homeless people. And the Bhagavatam describes how they were hiding behind clouds to avoid being attacked again by Bali and company. So anyway, this is a situation. Bali and the demons took over the heavenly planets. They were basically running the universe except for Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva, who did not intervene. Right. So what happened then was that Aditi is the mother of the demigods, the mother of Lord Indra and so many other of the demigods. Aditi, seeing her sons in this very unfortunate situation, from being the controllers of the heavenly planets to being homeless. Can you imagine living on the streets, Karanga Happy Road? How's that? Simon Street, living in the park above Simon Street there, between Simon Street and the university. I used to go through there every day. Yeah, just living in the park, from having been some just incredibly powerful and fantastically opulent person to living in the park just up there. You know what I'm referring to? Just up from Queen Street, a couple of blocks, there's the park up there on the way to the university, at least when I was there. So what a blow. So she performed what's called the Payavrata Ceremony. It's some sort of ritualistic type of worship of Lord Vishnu, or of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And she prayed for the Lord to appear to re-establish her sons, her children in the heavenly planets and get the demons out. So the Lord agreed, and the Lord appeared. So the Lord appeared as Vamana. And Srila Prabhupada describes Vamana as a dwarf Brahmin. I must admit to having struggled a little bit with that. I mean, certainly he was just a small boy, like a 5-year-old child, but a dwarf? Anyway, maybe he was actually a dwarf. You know, it means a sort of physically handicapped, not just little like a child, but kind of physically, you know, some unpleasant, unusual type of physical condition. But anyway, at the very least, he appeared as like, well, actually, first of all, it's described here in one of, I didn't keep the verse numbers, but that he appeared as, where is it? In his original, it says here, and sorry, I don't have the verse number. The Lord appeared in his original form. Anyway, that's something you can think about. I'll just leave that with you. That's definitely what is said, that the Lord appeared in his original form. And there is some sort of, discussion amongst devotees, some devotees. Does that mean that Lord Vamana, he initially appeared as Krishna? Anyway, like I said, you can think about that. But it says here, the Lord appeared in his original form. And when he appeared like that, he was greeted by Lord Brahma. Lord Brahma was there, and all sorts of demigods, Gandharvas, Manus, Pitas, fire gods, Apsaras, and so on. All these heavenly type people greeted him. And he was certainly looking amazing, blackish in complexion, lotus face, decorated with earrings resembling sharks, in his 4 hands with a conch shell club, lotus and disc, in yellow garments, his eyes like the petals of a blooming lotus. And, you could go through that. I think it's chapter 18. Really sort of classic appearance of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Siddhas, Vidyadharas, Kimparushas, Kinnaras, Charanas, Yakshas, and all these higher level people greeted him, glorified him. And Kashyapa, who's the husband, of course, of Aditi, he was there, and he was just in ecstasy, calling out, Jai, Jai. So, and then in the presence of Kashyapa and Aditi, the Lord assumed the form of Vamana. And Prabhupada specifically uses the term a Brahmin dwarf, a brahmachari. So, very attractive though, extremely attractive, and very inspiring looking. And so all those personalities, they continued with their greeting and their worship, although now he's changed form into Vamana, and he was given different things, Brahminical type things. Mother Earth gave him a deer skin. Chandra gave him a Brahma Danda, the danda of a brahmachari. Aditi gave him some cloth, and Lord Brahma gave him a water pot, and so on and so forth. All these different great personalities gave him all these things. And then, and this is now when, so this is just before, immediately bore Vamana goes and enters the palace of Bali. It's actually the palace of Indra, of course, in fact. But Bali had taken over, and Bali was doing an Ashvamedha sacrifice when Vamana walked in, having been received by all these different, some demigods and others like great sages, and so on, these different personalities. We mentioned many of them. And just one, and it's also an interesting little subtle point, you could say, that when Vamana, as the Bhagavatam puts it, when Vamana entered the palace of Bali and entered where they were doing the Ashvamedha Yajna, then, he walked in, he's just this small boy, but as he walked in, by his weight, he pushed down the earth with every step. He didn't just walk on the earth as we all do, but as he stepped, he sort of sunk into the earth, something along those lines. And, anybody who noticed that, maybe they didn't notice so much, but I would have thought that anyone who noticed that might have thought, wait a minute, now who is this apparently little boy, 5 years old, little brahmachari? Maybe there's more to him than meets the eye. So, okay. So he came in. It wasn't exactly the palace. In fact, it was just outside, or somewhere outside, next to the Narmada River. This is what it says here. So now there he is. Now he's in the assembly there with Bali Maharaj and Bali Maharaj's associates and his priests, headed by Shukracharya. And Vamana walks in, and it's, he's very effulgent. In fact, it says here, his effulgence diminished the brilliance of the priests and their disciples, because normally Brahmins and very pious people like this, they have some effulgence due to their piety and things like this. They have some effulgence, just like I can see on Kadambakanana Prabhu's forehead. Can you see, devotees? I can see. There's an effulgence. And Nanda Vraja Prabhu also. Yeah, there's some effulgence there to some degree. But Lord Vamana was so effulgent that he made them look dim So obviously he's very striking little boy, very pious and saintly looking little boy. So those priests and everyone stood up. They stood up for Vamana Dev as he came in. Nobody made an announcement, like he's chairman of the GBC or some sort of, sadistic announcement like that. He just walked in, but they just immediately saw, wow, look at him. Just like when Shukadev Goswami arrived in the assembly on the bank of the Ganges, when Maharaj Parikshit was there, wanting to know what to do at the time of death. Shukadev just walked in and there was no announcement. This is Shukadev Goswami and he is such and such and such and such. He just walked in and everyone stood up. And even Vyasadeva and Narada, who were very specifically Shukadev's seniors, they didn't exactly stand up, but they offered respect. And they allowed him to take the seat of honor. These are interesting points. So yeah, Bali Maharaj, so all the priests stood up and Bali Maharaj, he was so impressed. Bhagavatam says he was jubilant seeing Vamana. Yeah, and he offered him a seat with great satisfaction. Here's another little, and then Bali Maharaj washed his feet. I mean, they had really a whole greeting ceremony for this unannounced little boy because he was so impressive in these Brahminical type ways. Yeah, so then just another subtlety. This is an interesting point. Listen to this. It's not mentioned in Bhagavatam, but in Brahma Vaivarta Purana, it's stated there that Bali Maharaj's younger sister, her name was Ratnamala, like a string of jewels, Ratnamala. She was a younger sister, and she was sort of maybe like a teenage girl or even early teenage girl. And when Ratnamala saw Vamana, Ratnamala thought that this boy is so beautiful and just so wonderful. I want to have him as my son. In that, sometimes young girls play with dolls, of course, and there's, even in their early days, in so many cases, there's some idea that, of children, being attracted, at least say, to having children. Right. But I can tell you, in case I forget, at the end of the whole pastime, when Bali Maharaj surrenders to Lord Vamana and says, put your third step on my head, and Vamana arrests him and ties him up with the ropes of Varuna. So Ratnamala, in the beginning right now, she's just feeling so attracted and affectionate, you could say. And she feels, I'd like to have him as my son. But when Vamana arrests Bali Maharaj at the end, towards the end, then Ratnamala thinks that, all right, maybe I will have him as my son, but if I do, I will kill him. And in her next life, she was born as Putana. Yeah. Okay, so anyway, here we are. And Lord Vamana has arrived, and Bali Maharaj is greeting him and appreciating him. And they have an exchange together. Bali Maharaj, one of his very prominent characteristics in terms of piety, and, sort of like it's an indirect part of devotee nature, extremely charitable mood. Bali Maharaj practically immediately starts saying that, do you want something? Can I give you something? This was his practice with Brahmins. But then there's an exchange, and it's a very interesting exchange. Lord Vamana, for quite a number of verses, it's I don't know if it's maybe not 20, but maybe 15 or something along those lines, Vamana glorifies Bali Maharaj in terms of the qualities of his ancestors. And even specifically, would you believe, Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu, that you are coming in such a, extraordinary family of heroes. So it's not surprising that you're a hero. This is the basic idea. Yeah. That when Lord Vishnu fought with Hiranyaksha, that the Lord killed him, but it was very difficult. In other words, he's glorifying Hiranyaksha. Even the Supreme Personality of Godhead found it very difficult to kill him. So in other words, Hiranyaksha, he is just such a really great hero. And therefore, afterwards, the Lord thought, it says here, later as the Lord thought about the uncommon prowess of Hiranyaksha, he felt himself victorious indeed. So it's a glorification. And then Hiranyakashipu. So you can go through all the details, but Vamana glorifies Hiranyakashipu as an ancestor of Bali and as a great hero. Yes, it's interesting. It's really interesting. He says, one thing he says, Hiranyakashipu's anger against Lord Vishnu persisted until his death. Other people in the bodily concept of life maintain anger only because of false ego and the great influence of ignorance. So, in other words, Hiranyakashipu, he was a big hero and he had special anger. So, like this, it's a very interesting exchange. It's worth going through to see the sort of the nuances there. Obviously, Lord Vamana is not so appreciative of Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu, but there's something good or interesting, at least, or striking about everyone. Even if someone's a big fool, they got to have something going for them. Yeah. So then, because now, Bali Maharaj has already said that I want to give you something. Just tell me what you want, it's yours. So then Lord Vamana asks his classic, famous, hugely famous request. He says, I ask only 3 paces of land to the measurement of my steps, Bali Maharaj, not your steps, Bali Maharaj, my steps. And Bali Maharaj, there's an exchange now between Bali Maharaj and Lord Vamana, in which Bali Maharaj just thinks this is a bit of a joke. This little boy, he's just a little boy, he doesn't understand the value of things. So Bali says that, you're a Brahmin, and so, that's good, but you're a boy, and your intelligence is insufficient. This is how Prabhupada translates it. And therefore, you're not very prudent in regard to your self-interest. You should use your head, in other words. And Bali Maharaj says, listen, 3 steps of land, come on, I'll give you a planet. You want a planet? I'll give you one of the universal islands, which is, multiple planets. Yeah, I'll give you like that. He says, what does he say? You can ask from me as much land as you want. Or you can ask for a wife, of course, Lord Vamana is just a little boy, but still, if you can, I can give you elephants, and so on like this. So then this is another really classic statement. This is just a really good one. And you should all note it. You should all note this, that Lord Vamana says, he says, no, don't worry about it. Keep your planet, your island, and whatever else. I just want my 3 paces of land according to my 3 paces, my measurement. And he says, if I was not satisfied with 3 paces of land, then surely I would not be satisfied even with possessing one of the 7 islands consisting of 9 varshas. Even if I possessed one island, I would hope to get others. And this is, for devotees in Krishna consciousness, this is such an important point to bear in mind, that material acquisition and, all that collecting paraphernalia for oneself, this is not the program. As devotees, sometimes it happens to some. It may not happen to all devotees, but definitely it happens to some, that in the course of their devotional service, some money or property, these types of things come their ways. It happens to some, not all, but it definitely happens to some. Srila Prabhupada, of course, so much property came his way, so much money came his way. When I just after I joined in January 73, and a few months, like April or May, George Harrison, the famous Beatle, donated Bhaktivedanta Manor. And I'm sure, I imagine some of you have been there, at least you've seen photos, you know what it's like. It's now it's worth a good few million. And even in those days, when George Harrison bought it, it cost £250,000. And, we're talking about 50 years ago almost. So, and, in different places in Los Angeles and here and there. So, and Prabhupada was not trying to be a businessman. He was preaching Krishna consciousness. So sometimes, and for some of us, some of these things come our way too without us looking for them or trying to get them. But we must not be attached. We must not become attached. We must not become dependent on having these things that will undermine our Krishna consciousness. Rather, we should see that these things are engaged properly in Krishna's service. Yeah. So anyway, that was Lord Vamana's response. That just let me have the 3 steps of land. That's it. That's enough. I remember when I was a child, the richest man in the world was Paul Getty, an American oil dealer sort of person. And I remember as a child seeing a program about him on television. And he was asked, in the program, he was asked, Mr. Getty, do you have a philosophy of life? And Mr. Getty said, yes, I have a philosophy of life. He said, my philosophy can be summed up in one word: more. Welcome to the material world. Okay, so the Lord, that was the deal. 3 steps of land, fine. And Bali Maharaj and his wife, what's her name? Vindhyavali, I think. Vindhyavali, something like that. They took up water pots in their hands, which means that we are ready to live with nothing. We've offered you whatever you like, you just say, and you can take everything if you want, and we're ready. We've just got water pots. If, that's all we're left with. So, okay, so this is the situation. Then, now, an extremely interesting thing happens. Shukracharya, the priest guru, teacher, sort of, that sort of person, and definitely very influential with Bali Maharaj and his people. Shukracharya raises objections that, no, wait a minute, don't agree to that. Not 3 steps of land. Shukracharya has tuned in sufficiently to understand that, wait a minute, this is Vishnu. This is Vishnu. And Vishnu, you got to watch out for Vishnu if you're a demon. Because, you never know what he's going to do. But it's usually not good for the demons. So he said a few things, and I'll tell you a couple of these things because it's quite amazing. So first of all, he says, this is actually Vishnu, and I'm sure he's come to take all your land, your wealth, your power, your fame, and whatever he can get, and he'll give it to Indra. So don't give it to him. And he actually tells Bali Maharaj, with his first step, he will take the 3 worlds away from you. He says that. And he says, let's see, listen to this. Learned scholars do not praise that charity which endangers one's own livelihood. Don't give too much. Charity, sacrifice, austerity, and fruitive activities are possible for one who is competent to earn his livelihood properly. So if you give away everything, how are you going to earn your livelihood? So it would be inappropriate. And of course, the sort of, the understanding which evolves from that is that if you lose everything, you will not be able to pay me, Shukracharya. Yeah, because Shukracharya is existing on the charity of Bali Maharaj. He has no, alternative form of source of income. So if you lose everything, I lose everything. So you can't do this. And then he says some pretty amazing things. Listen to this. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but it's very interesting that one might argue that since you've already promised, how can you refuse? O best of the demons, just take from me the evidence of the Bhavricha Shruti, some, I think, little more obscure Vedic literature, which says that a promise is truthful preceded by the word Om, and untruthful if not. And Bali Maharaj, you did not say Om before you made that promise. So therefore, it is not a valid promise, and it's fine to break it. No problem. You can break your promise. Yeah. So he says things like this. And the last thing he says, and, ladies, watch out. Anyway, this is this fellow's devious mind. It's amazing. The last thing he says is, in flattering a woman to bring her under control, in joking, in a marriage ceremony, in earning one's livelihood, when one's life is in danger, in protecting cows and Brahminical culture, or in protecting a person from an enemy's hand, falsity is never condemned. So don't worry. Don't, get into your sort of moral state of mind, what's right and wrong and what's good and not good. It's okay to break your promise. So yeah, Shukracharya, that's sort of his lecture to Bali Maharaj. But Bali Maharaj is not impressed, really not impressed. And it's understandable because Shukracharya is not a devotee. So people are not devotees, you push them far enough in some negative type of direction, and they just start losing it. They can't keep focused, whereas devotees can. Even in the face of disaster, devotees can stay focused. So Bali Maharaj, he rejects those instructions of Shukracharya that you can break your promise, you can tell a lie, and don't worry about it. He says, I am the grandson of Maharaj Prahlad. How can I withdraw my promise because of greed for money when I've already said that I shall give this land? How can I behave like an ordinary cheater, especially toward a Brahmin? There's nothing more sinful than untruthfulness. Because of this, Mother Earth once said, I can bear any heavy thing except a person who is a liar. Now that's a good one to bear in mind too. Devotees, generally speaking, devotees should be very honest and not duplicitous. I mean, yeah, really, really. I do not fear hell, poverty, an ocean of distress, fall down from my position, or even death itself, as much as I fear cheating a Brahmin. So these are all, I mean, you know, a lot can be said about this. He mentions Dadichi. I won't get into a discussion about Dadichi, but Dadichi gave his body to the demigods. Take it. I mean, living body. Yeah, take me. Do what you like. So then Shukracharya cursed Bali. Because of disobeying me, you shall very soon be bereft of all your opulence. So anyway, then you know the story. Lord Vamana takes his 3 steps according to his measurement. First step covered the lower and middle planetary systems. Second step, the upper planetary systems. And then, you know, I mean, it's all, we're really abbreviating here. But when Lord Vamana had taken those 2 steps and basically covered the entirety of Bali Maharaja's kingdom, then his followers objected and attacked Vamana. But they got smashed. They got smashed. There was some Vaishnav, Kshatriya, sort of some demigod servants of Vishnu around. They attacked the followers of Bali and smashed them. So then it's back to Vamana and Bali. And Lord Vamana says, listen, you said you'd give me 3 steps of land. You've only given me 2. You're a cheater. That's pretty heavy. That's pretty heavy. After Bali's just given everything, just take it. But it's the pastime. It's the relationship, the interaction. And this is where Ratnamala decides that in her next life, if she has Vamana as her son, she'll kill him. So yeah, Lord Vamana said, you broke your promise, I arrest you, I'll punish you. And he ties him up with the ropes of Varuna, and Bali's tied up. And Bali says, all right, my lord, all right, you please put your 3rd step on my head. And he becomes the famous example in terms of the 9 devotional processes of the devotee who surrendered everything. It's the 9th of the 9, to surrender everything. So yeah, so Bali Maharaj, you know, he's tied up, but he's okay. He's not in anxiety. He glorifies Lord Vamana and tells Lord Vamana, I have to follow in the footsteps of my grandfather Prahlad and just give everything, give myself. And then Prahlad appears, and Prahlad blesses Bali. Then Lord Brahma appears, and we're sort of abbreviating a little here, but Lord Brahma appears, and Lord Brahma tells Lord Vamana that please release him. You know, he's a good man. You don't overdo it. Don't punish him too severely. He's already offered everything he has. So Brahma says, how then can he deserve to suffer from arrest? So please release him. And Lord Vamana agrees and said, yes, fine. And Lord Vamana, the whole thing pretty much concludes with Lord Vamana blessing Bali, that Bali will become Indra during the period of Sarvarani Manu, during that Manvantara of Sarvarani Manu. He'll become Lord Indra, and until he becomes Lord Indra, he will live on Sutala. And the Lord says that Sutala was made by Vishvakarma according to my instruction. And it's especially protected by me, Lord Vamana says. And so basically the pastime concludes with Lord Vamana saying, "Oh, Bali Maharaj, now you may go to the planet Sutala, which is desired even by the demigods." So you're getting something higher than what you've got here, this position of Indra, something higher. Yes, on the planet Sutala, not even the predominating deities of other planets, what to speak of ordinary people, will be able to conquer you. As far as the demons are concerned, if they transgress your rule, my disc will kill them. Yeah, so Bali then, he goes to Sutala. Lord Vamana returns to the spiritual world. Hare Krishna. Shri Vamana Dev Ki. Shri Vamana Dvadasi Ki. Go Premanande. Haribol.
His Holiness Bhakti Chaitanya Maharaj ki jai. Maharaj, would you be available to take any questions? Yeah.
If you have a little time, if anyone wants, or yeah, sure, yeah. Or maybe Dave Marita Maharaj could enlighten us a bit, or maybe he's gone now, I think.
Krishna, Krishna,
Oh,
Hare
there you
Hare. We thank you for this comprehensive and incisive presentation of Lord Vamana Dev's interaction with Bali Maharaj, both preamble and conclusion. And I very much appreciated the various angles that you highlighted, the subtleties, as you said. So I'm grateful for having heard, and I'm locked down in your place of birth. But hearing you give class gives me desperately needed sadhu sangha.
You are too generous, Maharaj.
All right, I'll bow out now, and I'm sure there are some questions, and I'd like to thank you before I leave for your Madan Gopal Das, who is such a key player in the outreach here and very dedicated. He and his wife are fully having Krishna in the center of their family, and they're both wonderfully absorbed in outreach in all aspects.
Well,
Thank you.
if they're assisting you, Maharaj, he particularly, I'm very happy.
Glories to Srila Prabhupada.
And glories to Prabhupada. Haribol.
Haribol.
So any comment or question from anyone? Prashna? Ek prashna ho sakta hai?
Hi, Hare Krishna Maharaj. This is Nandaraj. Maharaj, going through this pastime of Vamana, it appears there are a lot of heavenly visits, interplanetary visits taking place. So how do we look at this pastime in view of current scientific knowledge? Somebody asks us, would you believe in this? So how should we respond to that?
If we what was the question that they might say?
I was saying that in this pastime of Vamana, there seem to be a lot of interplanetary sort of travels and pastimes. If someone were to ask us, how is this possible in this modern, like secular scientific world, how should we respond to this sort of thing?
Yeah, well, I would suggest that you just say that now NASA, the American space program, NASA and the Chinese are getting into it, and Russia, and even India's getting into it a bit, trying to go interplanetary to Mars or the moon and whatever. So back in those days, the people would also do the same things, but they were much more advanced in those flying sciences. Like when I went to England and then that was 1972. I went by ship, and it was quite normal. It was quite normal to go by ship. It's not just everyone flew, but now everyone flies. If they're going to go from New Zealand to England or to anywhere, just to Australia, or just from Auckland to Wellington, everyone flies, because the science is kind of developed like that. So that's what I'd say, is that those people were more scientifically advanced, and they were able to do, like I mentioned, Lord Indra, after the churning of the Milk Ocean, the demigods got that nectar, and then they killed all the demons. But Shukracharya brought all the demons back to life. And then the Bali Maharaj and the demons attacked the demigods and kicked them out. And, then the whole story of Vamana comes from that. So that's what I'd say, something like that. And they may say, oh, we don't believe that, people can't do that. But what else are you going to say? I would say something like that they're more scientifically advanced than we are now. Is that okay, Nandavraj?
Yeah, thank you, Maharaj.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Sabtik? Ek prashna or?
Hare Krishna Maharaj, Surat Krishna Das here.
Hare Krishna. Dhanyavad pranam.
Maharaj, as you just said, Bali Maharaj, after a lot of struggle and the battle, won over Indra. and was obviously celebrating when this whole incident happened, kind of sacrifice and things like that. How do we understand that even though Vamandev appeared as a small Brahmana, and he was kind of forewarned, should we say, by Shukracharya that you struggled so much to get that kingdom, and this person, whoever he is actually going to take that away from you.
Right.
What was Bali Maharaja's mindset when he actually agreed to give the donation or the sacrifice?
Yeah, that's a good point. And, I mean, we've touched on it to some degree, that he was so extremely pious. He was so extremely pious, you could say, to a pain, if you know what I mean by that at any cost, he would maintain his moral principles. He would never, he wouldn't tell a lie, even if his life depended on it. And, at some point in the narration, Srila Prabhupada makes the point that he was so attached to being honest and upstanding and like that he sort of overdid it. But still, for a person because his position was slightly mixed. He's a devotee, but his position is not, there's a little mixture there, but the mixture is with the mode of goodness mainly. So he was extreme mode of goodness. And therefore, even though, he was advised that, looks like this is going to happen, but he didn't think, okay, when Vamana asks for 3 steps by his measurement, then I'll tell him, sure, 3 steps, but by my measurement, something like that. So it's, there's no such thing as absolute material mode of goodness. But Bali Maharaj was very close to absolute material mode of goodness. So even though knowing that this is going to be the end for me, he would still say, sure, fine, you go ahead. Yeah.
So Maharaj, would that be one of the reasons he's considered a Mahajan?
Well, it's more, Mahajan is more because of him being a devotee. Yeah. I mean, it's connected. It's connected. But the Mahajans are Mahajans because they're devotees, really, not just because they're mode of goodness. You know the famous story of Ashvatthama, the elephant is dead, with Krishna and Maharaj Yudhisthira. In other words, it is possible from the Krishna conscious point of view, it is possible for the mode of goodness to become anatha. I'm sure you understand anatha. Yeah, it can become like an obstacle, you could say, to Krishna consciousness and interfere with Krishna consciousness. Of course, it's only in very extreme cases that the mode of goodness would really be anatha. Usually our problem is much more that we lack mode of goodness, even though we're devotees. That's generally more of a problem than being too much in the mode of goodness. But that's the lesson from that particular pastime, that Maharaj Yudhisthira, in a certain sense, was a bit too much attached to the mode of goodness. And therefore, after that incident, his chariot, which was up to that point riding a couple of inches above the ground, it just dropped to the ground and it never came up again. And some say it's because he got implicated in this sort of trickery of Krishna. But the real understanding is it's because he disobeyed Krishna when Krishna told him initially that just announce that Ashvatthama's dead. You know that story, right? Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Maharaj.
Okay. Haribol. Ho gaya.
Maharaj, Bali Maharaj exemplifies Atmanivedan, the process of complete surrender. So practically, how can we do that, or how can we apply that? How can we develop complete?
Well, we have to utilize everything in Krishna's service. You know, when you're a householder, as I'm sure the great majority, or maybe even all of you are, who are on the program now, when you're a householder, you have to use your intelligence and pray to Krishna to give you the inspiration, the intelligence, the ability to look after your family nicely, properly in Krishna consciousness, but in such a way that you can really dedicate yourself as much as is humanly possible to devotional service. In other words, you know, avoiding extravagance, avoiding unnecessary purchasing and all that. Simple living and high thinking. You know, it really takes some intelligence to do that. But that's what one needs to do if one is a householder. You got to look after your family. There's no doubt about it. That's part of your Krishna consciousness. But you've also got to do as much service as you can for the movement, for the spiritual master, for Prabhupada. Yeah, and that's Atma Nivedana.
Thank you, Maharaj, for that practical instruction.
Hare Krishna. Hogaya?
Any other questions? Right.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, just one more comment or question. You mentioned about Ratnamala, the younger sister of Bali Maharaj.
Right.
She had intense desire to have Vamana as the son. But then when she saw that he is absurd Bali Maharaj's kingdom, she became extremely angry. And because of that, she was born, she took birth as Utana in the next life. So this impression in this life, such intense impression, how is that carried forward in the next life? I mean, what can we learn from this?
Well, you can learn that, you know, the subtle body is very sensitive. I mean, we all know that. We're all sensitive emotionally, and, you know, different things happen in our lives and it affects us. I mean, psychologically and emotionally, that means it's affecting the subtle body. So this whole experience for Ratnamala made such a massive impact on her subtle body. And the subtle body, you know, the gross body dies. And then, you know, you go into another gross body next lifetime, but the subtle body doesn't die. the same subtle body is carried over, just moves over into the next life of the next gross body, the same subtle body. So that impression, the impact of that whole episode on Ratnamala, because she's a demon. She's not a devotee. She's a demon. And demons, they really, when things like this, if they get cheated or abused or something, they're not like devotees who can just say, well, it's, my karma or Krishna's mercy. The demons, they can become dominated by such a memory of how I got abused, how I got cheated, how I got mistreated. It can dominate their whole lives, the rest of their lives. And it seems that's what happened with Ratnamala. And so she became Putana, and she was a professional killer of children. And she was just impelled to kill Krishna based on that the whole previous experience. TK.
Thank you, Maharaj. Thank you for your clarification.
Haribol. Okay.
Thank you very much, Maharaj. Jai His Holiness Bhakti Chaitanya Maharaj ki Jai.
Jai.
Thank you very much for your association, Maharaj. It's always it's always pleasing to the ears and pleasing to the heart. And we hope to have your association again soon in the future, Guru Maharaj.
Hare Krishna. Thank you all.
Thank you. And
see you all later. Next time. Bad Malenge. Next time, Malenge.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you, Maharaj. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. See you later.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. Hare Bol. So now we'd like to invite Radha Padma Mataji to sing Narsingha prayer. Radha Padma Mataji.
Yes, Mataji, I'm here.
Okay, you can take.
Hare Krishna. Namaste Narasimhaya. Namaste Narasimhaya. Pralada Lada Dayane. Pralada Lada Dayane. Hiranyakashi Purvakshaha. Shilatankala Kalaye. Ito Narsimha Parato Narsimha. Ito Narsimha Parato Narsimha. Ito Narsimha Parato Narsimha. Yato Yato Yami Tato Narsimha. Bahir Narsimha. Bahir Narsimha. Hridaye Narsimha. Bahir Narsimha. Hridaye Narsimha. Bahir Narsimha. Hridaye Narsimha. Narsingha Madhin Sharanam Pade. Tava Karatamalavare Nakha Adbhuta Shringa Dalita Hiranyakashipu Tanu Bringa Keshavadrita Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare, Jaya Jagadisha Hare. Jaya Narasimhadev, Narasimhadev, Jaya Narasimhadev, Jaya Prahlad Maharaj, Prahlad Maharaj, Prahlad Maharaj, Jaya Prahlad Maharaj, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Gurudev, 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev. जय जय श्री नरसिंहदेव भगवान की जय, प्रहलाद महाराज की जय, श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय, निताई गौर प्रेमानंदी हरि हरि बोल।
Radha Padma Mataji ki jai and the family ki jai.